My parents told me about my grandfather. He was a decent man, served in the army as a surgeon for many years, but something over there changed him. Maybe it was the destruction or the violence, or even the stress. We really don't know. All they told me was that one day, he snapped. They didn't tell me what happened. I'm not sure that they knew themselves. One day, he was a great surgeon. The next day, they stuck him as the barber. And that was it. Straight fall. No ifs, ands, or buts. And it didn't stop there. He lasted a day as a barber. Maybe even half a day if my mother is right. He was discharged in the blink of an eye. He lives on his own now. Grandmother died in childbirth, so he didn't have anybody to come home to anyways. From then on, he was a quiet, distant man. We visited him on holidays, but never more than an hour. And every time he just stared blankly at the wall, never saying a word. I didn't think anything of it. He was just a weird old person to me. And so I kept myself busy with toys or my phone as the years passed. One week, my parents had to go on a trip, some last-minute conference overseas, and while I was old enough to not have a babysitter, they felt better knowing somebody was there all the same. At such late notice though, they couldn't find a soul, so they turned to the only adult that they knew who was free, my grandfather. I was ready to be bored out of my mind, stuck with him. And when he pulled into the driveway in his old Buick, I honestly was a little bit surprised. With the way that he acted, I didn't think that he could drive. A thought occurred to me. I had friends who wanted to hang out this weekend, but with my parents gone, all plans had canceled rather quickly. But if Grandpa had a car, he could drive me. My parents waved their goodbyes and they drove away. Grandpa sat in the recliner my father normally occupied and took on his normal countenance. I rolled my eyes, but I powered forward. Even if he ended up ignoring me, I had to try. "Hey, Grandpa?" I mumbled. I cleared my throat and I tried again, louder. "Grandpa." He actually turned towards me, startling me a bit. His eyes seemed to take focus finally, right onto me. "You have such long hair," he drawled out. I blinked at him strangely. Sure, I was a boy, and sure, I had hair that had gotten a bit long over the summer, but normally I waited until school was ready to start up before I bothered Mom about it. Largely, it was the most words that I'd ever heard him say. Yeah, I guess," I replied. "But anyway, Grandpa, I was wondering if I could ask you to give me a ride somewhere." He gave me a few slow blinks and I thought for sure that he was gone again. "All right," he agreed. "But you can't go out with a dude like that." If that was the price to pay, so be it. It didn't matter to me either way. I grinned from ear to ear. "Cool, let me text my friends, and I'll meet you in the car." He slowly stood and looked around. "Do you have any clippers?" he asked. "Like scissors?" I questioned. He shook his head. "Electric ones, like maybe your dad might have used," he corrected. I was sure that Dad probably had a set somewhere. I went back to the room, into the bedroom, and under the sink, digging around. It took a bit, but in the back, sure enough, there were clippers in a little carrying case. I brought them back out and I handed them over. He zipped it open and he nodded in approval, zipped it back up and then began to make his way to the car. I followed, trying not to bounce on my heels. We got in and got moving down the road, before I realized that I better call my parents, no matter how much I didn't want to. If they decided to call the house to check on me and nobody answered, there would be hell to pay. I flipped open my phone and I punched in their cell phone number. After a few rings, my mom fumbled with the phone. I could hear her distantly muttering something like, "It's your phone, honey. I don't know how it works." Finally, her voice became clear, albeit a bit loud as she shouted into the phone. "Hello?" I heard my dad tell her about shouting and she tried again. "Hello?" "Hi, Mom, it's me. Just wanted to let you know that Grandpa is taking me over to Sean's." "Oh, honey, don't bother your grandmother now," she chided. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "It's fine. I asked and he said that it's okay," I replied. "Can I speak to him?" she queried. "He's driving right now," I responded. But while I said that, I realized that we were sitting stock still at a stop sign, closer to the edge of town, without me even recognizing that we had moved. I made to hand him the phone, but he was just staring down at his hands, admiring the clippers that I had handed him earlier. At first, I thought he was in another trance maybe, but he turned them in his hands, almost petting them like a small animal or a lost lover. I shook my head. Old people are weird. I snapped out of it and I noticed that my hand was still halfway to him with the phone, and I pulled it back to my ear. "Hold on just a second, Mom. Let me tell him where to go." I pushed the phone under my chin before letting her respond. Just head straight that way and turn right at the second light." We sat there, and just as I was about to repeat what I said, he began to pull forward, not really looking at the road, still just down at the clippers. It was the outskirts anyway, with barely any actual civilization in sight. Just hills or farmland was all the eye could see. I didn't need to worry about him hitting anything, but I kept an eye on the road just in case I needed to grab the wheel all the same. I pulled the phone back to my ear, hearing the beginning crackle of static. I always forgot signal was bad this far out of town. "I'll let you go, Mom. We're heading out of range." "What?" Back to shouting again. I repeated myself, raising my voice just a tad, speaking a little bit slower. I nearly jumped out of my seat as a strange noise came from the driver's side of the car. I snapped my head that way, startled, only to realize that he had just turned the clippers on, still admiring them the same as before. I calmed my heart, ready to hang up the phone when my mom tried to say something else. "What was that, Mom? I can't hear you." "I said that noise." Static garbled her again, but I thought I got the gist of it. "Grandpa's just playing with the clippers. He wants to give me a haircut before we go." A burst of noises and more static. "What?" I pressed the phone into my ear, plugging the other from the constant clipper sound on the other side. "Don't hair." The sound was almost unbearable, growing louder as Grandpa chugged along, turning the wrong way at the light. "Mom, I'll call you when I get there from the landline. I can't hear what you're saying." "Won't stop." And then the static took over, deafening, and I just shut the phone, ready to correct our course. "Grandpa, it's a right back there. You took a left." "Just a small detour. These babies won't be enough. I have more tools in my place." He spoke over the noise, and glanced over to me for the first time on our little ride, his eyes gleaming, looking happy for once in his life, at least the most that I had ever seen. I was a little crestfallen, but I knew that he didn't live that much further, and I figured that there is no point to ruining his good mood. I may lose my ride if I did. Time dragged by nonetheless. The radio didn't work in the car. I tried it, and besides cows, nothing was worth looking out here in the boonies. When we finally pulled into his driveway, I did my best not to wince. I had visited once when I was little and my parents mentioned it a lot, but since my last stay, my grandpa's cabin had fallen into a hell of a state. An ancient-looking house built what looked like centuries ago stood on a bed of overgrown weeds and dirt clumps. The trees overhead were long dead and creaked back and forth in the breeze as I cracked open my door to step out. The windows were all boarded up, the little bits you could see covered in dust. The door hung slightly off kilter, broken in places and cobwebs covered every perceivable surface. It felt like the whole foundation was askew, ready to sink into the earth at the slightest touch. Grandpa stood, making his way to the front door, clippers still buzzing at his side, only stopping to turn back to me and motion me inside. I didn't like the idea, but with the smallest of smiles, all teeth from Grandpa, I caved and I followed him in. The inside of the house was no better off. Most of the furniture was covered in plastic sheets, save for one well-worn recliner. You could see the path that you normally walked when home, it being the only clean section of floor visible, and thoroughly scuffed. The dust was thick everywhere you looked, and every breath felt laden with more of it. I held a hand over my mouth and I followed him into the kitchen. He pulled a dining chair out, pulling the sheets off it as he did so, motioning me to sit down. I did, glancing at the pile of dishes in the sink, flies buzzing around them, and I made note not to come here again if I could. Right or not, this was seriously gross. Grandpa opened the fridge with a slight clatter, pulling out a slice of cake and placing it before me. Surprisingly, it looked fresh, not to mention delicious. It wasn't almost any kid's weak spot sweets. As soon as he handed me a fork, I dug in without a word, and I left him to grab whatever he needed. Darkness. I blinked a few times, trying to adjust. Where was I? What happened? I felt so sleepy, so drained, and sort of heavy. I was definitely lying down on hard flooring, something like concrete maybe, and I was wrapped in a blanket. I remembered the cake and nothing else. There was no light wherever I was, no windows. It felt so hard to move. As I began to shift, my whole body felt strange, different somehow. I couldn't place the feeling with anything that I had felt before. I managed to sit up, my eyes beginning to grow accustomed to the darkness. The blanket fell from me and I let it. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't quite hot either. It was just nothing. The blanket looked dark and damp, but I could barely tell. It looked old, and I decided I didn't want to touch some moldy old blanket any more than I already had. I stood, wobbly. The floor seemed rough, but I still couldn't tell. It was like my fingers were asleep. I held them up to my face, but I couldn't see more than dark blobs before me. Honestly, my whole body felt asleep. Little pinpricks at best, and not much else. I reached out in the air for anything, finally tripping over the stairs. Was I in the basement? Grandpa! I croaked, hoarse. I felt so thirsty. I tried again louder. Grandpa! I heard footsteps above me and the basement door creaked open, the light blinding me. I waved my hands wildly, stunned. You're awake. Do you like your haircut? Huh? I managed, confused. What? Your haircut. Remember, haven't you seen? What are you talking about? I scowled, still blinking. I was suddenly guided to sit in a chair, barely feeling the ghost of a hand on my shoulder. You must see. It's such a wonderful job. Really, you must see. My gut churned. The way he said it, so full of glee. Almost crazed and delirious. I dreaded to see the bowl cut that he may have given me. When my eyes adjusted to the light, I screamed. My grandfather held me down so I couldn't move. I couldn't run, though I didn't think I could if I tried. My legs would have given out. I felt bile in my throat and I realized it was the first thing that felt real to me. Everything else, the blanket, the floor, his hand on my shoulder, they had been distant, fleeting, barely even there at all. Something from another world entirely. My skin was gone. Every scrap, every nerve ending clean cut. Just a form of muscle and sinew moving as I screamed and I screamed. Life would never be normal again for me. Leaving that dark basement and holing up in my room was all that I did. After all of this time, I realized why he wasn't allowed to be a surgeon or even cut hair, and what my mother had tried to say before the static had cut in. Don't let him cut your hair. He won't know when to stop.